us over to Lindsay.
Hi, thank you, Ellen, for having me today. My name is Lindsay Conboy. I am an adjunct faculty member at Howard Community College, where I teach ESL and GED, and I work at the English Language Center, where I'm also currently writing the social studies curriculum for our ESL for GED class coming up this fall. I've also taught ESL at Notre Dame of Maryland University, where I was the course administrator. And prior to working in adult education, I taught ESOL and social studies in K-12 education, as well as a few other things. So I actually have another poll that I'm going to ask Ellen to put up, just to see what it is that everyone actually, how much experience you have with teaching ESL students. So while that is up, I'm just going to go over our agenda for today. So today we will define the ABCs of ESL, ascertain why ELLs and RELs may be in your classes if you teach GED or ABE, and identify challenges and remedies in reading and writing. And then time permitting, I have a Jamboard ready to collaborate to be able to synthesize the information I gave you today and collaborate to get other ideas. And I have a Google site so that you can go to it anytime and check back and see what is going on. So wow, we have, the majority of people have 3 to 5 years of ESL experience, which is great. Some of my information may be basic, but hang on because there's some extra stuff coming. And wow, there are quite a few that have 6 to 10 years and over 10 years of experience. So I am really, really impressed with all of your ESL experience. For those of you who are new to ESL, the first part is just for you, and hopefully you will learn a lot as we go along. So if we take a look, this is just a small portion of the alphabet soup that we come up against in ESL. And as you will see, all of them obviously have to do with English language proficiency. But the ones that I'm going to point out to you for today, these are the ones that I'm going to speak most about and refer to. So ELL is English language learner. ESL, English as a second language. RELL or REL is released or reclassified English language learner. SIFE or SLIFE, students with limited or interrupted formal education. And LESLA, which there was a great presentation on yesterday, is literacy, education, and second language learning for adults. The other two acronyms that I really want you to be aware of are BICS and CALP. So these are really important as our students start off in basic language learning and then they move to the academic language. So quick answer to the question, yes, the presentation will be sent out later on, I believe by the VTI. I will also give you a link to the Google site where you can take a look at this. So BICS is Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills, and those are the basic conversation that the ESL students receive in the first few years that they begin classes. And there is some academic language that is beginning to be added into curriculum, but it doesn't go far enough. So when the students are ready to do more academic work, you begin to do more of the CALP, which is the Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency. And the reason why I want to point this out today is it takes about 3 to 5 years to become proficient in English in BICS, in that interpersonal communication. But it takes 5 to 10 years, depending on the student, to master proficiency in CALP. And that is a huge significance because as they move into academic courses, whether it's for GED or for if they're going to an apprenticeship or they're moving on to university, this language is really challenging and tends to be very unique to the specific content. So I want to take a look at why RELs or ELLs are in GED, content classes, and workforce development classes. And this is just an overall look at why the adult students are taking these classes, and even if they have a high level of English language proficiency. So first off, we have age of arrival. So even though many states have extended graduation ages, Maryland is 21, immigrants in their late teens or early 20s opt not to attend high school and go on to community college or other community-based language programs so that they can develop their proficiency. When I worked in K-12, I saw a number of high school students that would come in, and they were overwhelmed, and they're quickly moved out of ESOL and into those content classes. So, education system in their home country. Education varies around the world, and some are excellent, some are not so excellent. We can see varying education throughout the United States, and so we can also use that as a model for when we look at other countries. So, for example, in some places in El Salvador, high school goes to 10th grade, and that's when they graduate. And so what we have here in the United States is much more developed in that content area, in those content skills, and whether it's STEM or English language classes, or not English language, but for reading and writing. So, and there can also be a lack of content, which makes it difficult for our students as they move from English language acquisition to the content area, because they don't have that context. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. And then we also have students that are SLIFE or have limited or interrupted formal education. This also includes students who are LESLA. And a good example of this would be refugees who have gaps in their education. I mean, this could be anyone. I'm just focusing on with some students that I've worked with. And depending on when they've had to leave their home, they may not have that education. Either they had some education left and then there's no education, or they were brought up in that system and do not have the literacy or academic skills that are taught early on in schools. I have also had personal accounts for my own students where it's just too dangerous for them to go to school, and there may be curfews and they may not be able to access school. There are a whole variety of reasons. And then they may just drop out of a U.S. high school. So if they've been here for a long time, whether they are a Gen 1.5, so coming here very young in their lives, or whatever reason, they drop out of high school. So I'm going to take a look at that really quickly for you so that you get a better perspective of why students who maybe they've been in the United States since they were 5 or 6 years old or 10 years old, why they are now in our GED classes. So Sugarman says that there are 3 factors, main factors, that contribute to English language learners dropping out of high school. So we have pull factors, push factors, and falling out factors. So pull factors are those external factors that are pulling them away from school, such as work, family. They may have to care for an older or younger relative. Parenthood, they themselves are becoming parents. Illness, whether personal or family. And peer pressure. So some of their friends may already be out of school and they're saying, hey, you don't need to be there. Come hang out with us, or come look at how successful I am at my job. You can make money over going to school. We also have these push factors, and this is where there's an internal push, or the school system is pushing the students out of the school, and it has a lot of consequences. So it could be academic failure. If they aren't successful in classes, or they don't feel like their efforts are being recognized, then they start to feel hopeless and decide that school isn't right for them. There could be behavioral problems. So theirs, which could lead to suspension or expulsion, or others where they're struggling in American academic setting. And so sometimes school just doesn't feel like the right place for them. They're adjusting to a new country, a new culture, and they're not quite sure where they fit in. And this can come out in many different ways. Then we also have safety and instability, and that's just within the school community, and they may not feel safe in school. And then the one that makes me the most sad, I'm sorry for being subjective there, it's low expectations of teachers and administrators. I'm not necessarily speaking about the ESOL teachers, but in the general community, because there's so much pressure to have high test scores, that the teachers and administrators may just be frustrated by the lower test scores of the English language learners on the standardized tests, and they fear that it will ultimately reflect poorly on them. So these are several push factors. And then we have the falling out factors. So one example is apathy or disillusionment. So academic and social disengagement, put into special education or low-level classes just because they're English language learners. Aging out of the system, they turn 21 and they still haven't graduated. Or a combination of any of the previous factors. So it could be a combination of a push, a pull that result in a falling out. So in K-12, there are several different times when students might leave ESOL. And you could have a qualified exit. So according to Jung, a qualified exit means they are doing well in their classes, they've developed a high level of proficiency based on their WIDA score, or whatever this state-mandated proficiency exam is. You could also have an unqualified exit, or a forced exit, where there are quotas. Some school systems say this many students must exit ESOL every year. And so even if the students aren't ready, they're forced out. And sometimes they just want to be with their friends. So this is especially true in ESOL centers, and there is beginning to be more and more research on how ESOL centers, the students are being bused 20, 30, 60 plus minutes away from their homes, away from their friends. They can't participate in school activities. So they feel ostracized from the start. And then their friends are back in their community school and they don't get to see their friends. So that is a huge thing. And so these are how students are reclassified. Okay, so how does this all relate to us in adult education? So if we're teaching adult basic education, if we're teaching GED, or we're teaching content classes that may not be geared specifically for ESL, there are a lot of things that we can do. And I'm not sure, so I'm going to ask if your program has these specific classes for ESL getting ready for ABE. Can you go ahead and let me know in the chat? Because I would love to know if there are other programs out there that provide the content classes to prepare the students for the GED, the ABE GED classes. And while you're responding, I am going to go ahead and just talk a little bit about what we can do in these classes. Oh, that's great. There are quite a few, or well, there's one that has it. Okay. Oh, there are quite a few transition classes out there. So in the ABE classroom, there's something that we can do to help the ESOL students or the former ESOL students, the RELs. And they all go beyond good teaching. So some of this is very directly related to the SIOP model, which is something that is used in K-12 education and begins to go into the GED classroom as well. And these are some recommendations. Let's see, we have vocabulary. Vocabulary is so important to teach. Slow speech. So when I'm in the classroom, I actually speak a lot slower than I am right now. Repetition. So repetition, I'm going to speak a little bit about in a few slides, but this is not just repetition in the moment, but spaced repetition, where you're repeating the material and the skills every so often, or on assessments, so that the students don't forget how to use those skills. Scaffolding. Make it interactive. Modeling. And work on executive function skills. There's a lot of research right now that all students, not just ESL students, could benefit from explicit instruction in executive function skills. So how to stay organized, how to plan, how to goal set, how to take notes, and all the way down to even the most detailed organization, because they may not necessarily have these skills. And then, to me, one of the most important things that you can do in any classroom is build relationships. So find out who they are, why they're in your class, and help your students to set their goals and identify the steps it takes to reach the goals. And there was actually, the first day of VTI, there was an excellent presentation, and I think I saw Ahu on here, so I'm going to give a shout out to her. So if you get a chance to go back and watch that video, that would be great. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some challenges and remedies in reading. So we have vocabulary, prior knowledge, context, grammar, and skimming and scanning. And I know you're thinking, grammar? What does that have to do with reading? And I'm going to tell you about that in just a moment. So as we go into this, I want you to take a look at the word volume. And if you could, in the chat, can you write a quick definition of volume for me? The first definition of volume that you think of. Okay, how loud something is. There are 6 definitions, so I'm waiting. Here we go. How large something is, the size of an object, the container, the capacity, loudness. Yes. So all of those are all definitions of volume. So if you take a look at this, we have so many different definitions. And the Oxford Learner's Dictionary also points out that there are several idioms, 2 of which are speaks volumes, and sheer volume. I mean, this is crazy. So context may not even help if the students don't have an idea of what to do with it. And I chose volume because it was a word that just really confused one of my students in my ESL for GED science this spring. It completely baffled him, even though I was sitting there with a measuring cup. It was on Zoom. It was a little bit more challenging to come up with creative ways to demonstrate, but I brought in that realia, and we were talking about volume. I don't have any beakers at my house, unfortunately. Okay, so vocabulary. There's some key ways that you can really use vocabulary that would benefit all of the students in your classes, the ESL students, and if you have native English speakers, then this will help everyone. So you can pre-teach, use realia, or use real-life things. Total aside, my office at home is also our home gym because of COVID. And when we were talking about force in the science class, I would pull over the weights and we would talk about the weights, what would happen with it. And the students thought that was really funny of how we were making it practical and using real life things to talk about the vocabulary. Okay, flashcards or Quizlet explicitly teach how to use the text for to define the words. Break the class into groups in class or for homework to define the words and have them teach the new words. So as we know, teaching is the best way to learn. Explicitly teach affixes. So the more prefixes and suffixes the students know, the more vocabulary they have. And explicitly teach how to skim for new vocabulary prior to reading. And this will help them prevent having to stop at each new word in order to figure out what the meaning is before moving on. So looking at the words ahead of time, not just the glossed words, and then going back and trying to use the text to define them. Okay, so students need something to hang the new knowledge on. According to Abersold and Fields, if the topic is outside their experience or base knowledge, they are adrift in an unknown sea. So we do not want our students to be adrift. So you need to help them access that prior knowledge, and they have it. You can make it very relevant to their everyday lives. And you can do this through KWLs or want to know, learned. Sometimes I skip the L because that is part of the assessment. Cognitive mapping. So how is everything related? And you can connect that back to the KWL. And outlining. Explicitly teach outlining because it gives them a different view of the information. And then you can also connect that back to the cognitive mapping. But sometimes the learners' brains are different, and the chaoticness of the cognitive mapping may not work for some students. So the outlining may help them in that linear form to be able to see what they need to see. Okay, context. So you might be wondering why I have the picture of a black horse under context. So one day I was flipping through the Kaplan GED prep book, and an excerpt from Black Beauty just kind of stood out to me. So the excerpt was from the perspective of the horse, and it used an onomatopoeia. And so understanding personification, Black Beauty is in the first person from the perspective of the horse, the onomatopoeias. These are all things that our students may not be understanding. So a lot of students, as they are working to read and developing those English language literacy skills, they're going to generally be more concrete in their reading and have a more difficult time with things such as fables and idioms, and of course onomatopoeias, because oddly, or not oddly, those words such as buzz or whinny or neigh are all they're all cultural. I remember in middle school French class learning the onomatopoeias in French, and I thought they were so strange. But so those things have to be taught explicitly, even though they seem intuitive. They are for us because as native English speakers, if you're a native English speaker, but those have to be learned because they're, as I said, they're different in every language and culture. And so when you take a reading, what factors need to be understood if you are reading with a very literal perspective? And I remember in my working on my undergraduate degree, reading Spanish literature, and how literal I was with it. I was not picking up on the subtle nuances. Okay, as I said, we were going to address grammar from a reading perspective. Normally we think of grammar as writing, which is very important, but when you're reading, you need you need to understand the grammar, because grammar helps provide extra information. So things like appositives, extraneous information, so such as the sentence, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd president, used a wheelchair. Well, probably most of us know who FDR, or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was. And we probably know that he used a wheelchair and that he was a president and everything. But that information in those commas, the 32nd president, is very important information. And the students need to be able to recognize that. If we just read Franklin Delano Roosevelt used a wheelchair, it's kind of out of context unless the rest of the paragraph is about him too. Okay, so punctuation. How does it change the meaning? So it really, if you think about it, it really does change the meaning. And we're going to use the old adage, let's eat, Grandma. So you have that makes perfect sense. But that comma is really important because when you take it out, it's let's eat, Grandma. And our students may not understand the differences. This also comes in handy when you are teaching writing and working on punctuation. So if you point things out to that and kind of make it humorous and understand the differences between those two statements, you might get a really good laugh in class. Okay, so moving on, one of the things that I find challenging in teaching reading is skimming and scanning. So, but they are such important skills when it comes to high stakes testing, such as the GED or the NEDP. You can teach them how to skim and scan, such as read the questions before the passage, then read the passage for meaning, and then reread the questions and scan the information if they don't already know the answer. It's important because they could get mixed up and not realize exactly what the information is, and they may pick the wrong part of the passage if they are not absolutely positive of what it is they are looking for. So I'm going to pause for a second before we move on to writing. Are there any questions that anyone has? I know I'm talking very fast. If questions pop up, I will definitely answer them. So I love teaching writing. It's my favorite thing to teach in any classroom, and I think it's a skill that everyone needs to have. And so I am going to show you something that one of my students wrote, and I want you to take a moment to read this. And I realize you can get the gist of what is being said, and it more or less answers the question that was asked. But how do you help a student who's writing like this and explain to them all the little different things that are wrong without making them just overwhelmed and shut down? Okay. So there is a game that I play in my classes, and I call it my favorite oops. And I actually learned this in a professional development related, and it was related to math. So I'm going to bring it back to math after we look at the writing. So I take an example. Oh, there is a question. Wait a second. Do you have any good resources for lessons on skimming and scanning? Yes, I do. I actually have a really great lesson at the end of the session. My email will be there. And if you email me, I can email you this really cool lesson that I do, which basically is having the students skim and scan articles about skimming and scanning. And it's more advanced for more advanced level 3 and above, but the students seem to really enjoy it. So this really crazy grammar disaster. I put something on the board, and at the beginning of class, this is our warm up. It's usually something a student wrote before, or kind of a combination of things that students have written. I always have first letter capitalization and final punctuation as things that need to be corrected. And the students have to go through, and if we do it in person, they correct it on the board. Depending on technological skills, students on Zoom have either annotated on my screen, or they have they've written their corrections in the chat for me. And if we go through, we then check what the answers are and we correct it. So as the students are correcting it, they're recognizing what is being done wrong. And if there's something that the students still aren't getting, we go back and we explicitly discuss why this should be one way and not the other. So you can also do this in math. When I was teaching the science class, my students really struggled with the math in the physics. So if you are a math teacher, you can probably see right off the bat what went wrong with this answer. So for those of you who are not math lovers, basically you need to isolate x, so that means adding 20 to both sides. In this case, the student subtracted the 20 from this side, ending up in a completely wrong answer. So you can have the students correct it, submit their answers, and then you can go over what the final answer is and perhaps repeat the skill. Okay, let me just, oh, I like this. Going back to skimming and scanning, sorry to jump around. Patricia wrote for intermediate 1, our students scan an article for dates and events to complete a timeline. That is a great way to use skimming and scanning. I love it, especially since I'm a social studies teacher at heart. Okay, so scaffolding in writing is like scaffolding and everything else we do. So we start off with the teacher modeling and describing, and then the teacher guides student practice. Students work collaboratively in small groups. Students work in pairs, and then students work independently. And we're going to look at 2 ways that you can incorporate this in the classroom in just a moment. But first, we want to put this into action. So you can break down the skills of the paragraph even further. So when the students struggle with writing and they can't write an argumentative response or a summary of a reading, break it down to the sentence level. You can practice writing simple, compound, and complex sentences, then repeat and repeat and repeat. Explicitly teach how to use the question to write an answer, and then move back into paragraph writing. And you can circle through or cycle through all of these again and again to help them repeat those necessary skills. And as with everything, as I said, repetition. And it might seem boring to you, but research shows that it helps instill the procedure, and according to Young, the spaced repetition moves the skill from short-term memory to working memory to long-term memory. And once it's there, you know, it may need to be unlocked again, but it's in there. Okay, so these are 2 ways that I use to help work on parts of a paragraph. As you can see, I actually have the hamburger model behind me. But I like having these visuals, especially when working on the supporting details, because it gives that visual to the entire paragraph. And if you practice identifying first the topic sentence in paragraphs and the main idea, then you can go back and reuse those paragraphs that you're reading to highlight or circle the supporting details. And once they do that in reading, you can then have them do that, scaffold it to write on their own. And then eventually work on those concluding sentences. And start with the basics. Start with how to make it easier and broken down. Okay, so this, as I go to the next slide, I just saw this. So Peg wrote, sometimes she does a scavenger hunt with the students that they need to skim for a set of vocabulary words. So I love that. And Jennifer uses an everyday edit, which is like the favorite oops. So, and they hunt for 10 errors. So I love that. And she has the students collaborate on that. So I love it. Okay, so we're going to do some collaboration of our own. So you can go to this website, or you can scan and go on your phone if you're working from your computer. And I'm going to put this into the chat so that it's easier to go to. So here you go. And if you go to the Jamboard, you'll see that there are 5 different boards. So if you want to work on ideas for general reading, we also have general writing, science, social studies, and math. So you can collaborate on any of these Jamboards. Go ahead and either add text or add sticky notes. Different ways that you can incorporate these skills into your classes. And I'm going to give you about 5-10 minutes and post on the Jamboard, and then you can also take this opportunity to ask questions in the chat. Oh, if you have any questions, feel free to ask that in the chat, or you can go to the Jamboard and collaborate. Oh, we've got some posts already. Oh, okay. Oh, okay, sounds great. Okay. Oh, I love that in social studies. So you can shuffle up the states and put them in the wrong place, and the students have to replace or rename or replace the states. I love it. Okay, and math. Yes, y equals mx plus b. Okay. Oops. Oh, and we have some for general reading. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to let you guys collaborate just for a few more minutes. Okay, so I do have a bibliography. Everything that I said today was researched, and it is all the tips are evidence-based. And then as you're finishing up on the Jamboard, I do have a link to the presentation. I'm going to put that into the chat right now. Oops, click the wrong thing, sorry. And I'll come back to this slide in just a moment. Oops. Okay, so the Jamboard is hot right now, but I do have this, it's just a Google site. You can click and connect to my email if you need to. It is not voiced over, but I do have my presentation in there and then the Jamboard so you can go back and connect with it. So if you have any questions, I am happy to answer any questions you have. And until you post those, I'd like to thank Ellen again for moderating today. And I would like to thank Gina Davis for organizing the VTI. And for all of them for having me back for yet another presentation.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. I think this
My pleasure.
This is the epitome of peer sharing, and it's truly the purpose behind the Virtual Training Institute. So thank you so much. So much great research around the transition that ELL students are facing as they come in. And I actually really love that one of those very first slides that kind of explained all the alphabet soup, right? Because even in WIOA and in our state language, there's just so much difference that we see. So thank you so much for the excellent presentation. So if you guys have any questions for Lindsay, go ahead and keep typing those into the chat box. In the meantime, I'm going to add 2 links. One is going to be the link for the survey, which once you close out of most browsers, it will actually prompt you with the end of presentation survey as well. I'm also going to submit to the chat box the proof of participation form. We still have half of a day tomorrow of Virtual Training Institute sessions. So if you are going to any of those, please hold off on the proof of participation. But if this is your last one, you can go ahead and submit that. Please remember that it will take us a little bit of time, even though we have like all hands on deck to complete those. It certainly takes us a little bit of time to get that all completed. The other comment that I want to make is that all of the resources from our presenters and the recordings will be available on the VTI website by the end of June. So all of these fantastic resources from our instructors and any of the sessions that you weren't able to catch this week will be available to you. And we just love being able to offer this on a biannual basis for you. So thank you again, Lindsay. What a great presentation. Actually, we have 2 more presentations today. So if you can catch either of those, we'd love to see you. And if not, we will see you next time. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks.